Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Family Matters. We are joined today by Dr. William Mansbach, who will be talking a little bit about the role of sleep and the importance of sleep in our overall brain health. Welcome, Dr. Mansbach.
Great to be here with you, Lynn.
Thanks for taking the time to join us. Before we jump into today's topic, would you mind doing a brief introduction and just tell our families a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. So by way of background, I'm specialized in geriatric neuropsychology. People may know me as the creator of the BCAT system. I'm the director of the BCAT Research Center and the CEO of Counterpoint Health Services. So I do a mix of clinical work, research, and business operations.
Great. Thanks so much. So, Dr. Mansbach, as we start our topic today, thinking about sleep and the role of sleep, can you tell us a little bit about how is sleep connected to or important for overall brain health, right? Maintaining our thinking skills. Is there a relationship between sleep and brain health?
Well, this is an important question. And let me begin by saying that in a 24-hour cycle, what we refer to as a diurnal cycle, perhaps the most important, certainly one of the most important activities we can do is sleep. And hopefully in the time we have together, I can talk about why that is so important. So your question really is about maintaining or improving or optimizing brain health and its relationship to sleep or sleep's relationship to that, I think. And by brain health, we're really talking about the way of optimally being able to think and process and go through your life in a meaningful way. And at the same time, try to protect yourself, try to protect your brain from illnesses like Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So brain health is sort of its own kind of category, but I think that's basically what we mean. So with respect to sleep, I'll start categorically by saying that sleep is essential in maintaining brain health. And you're probably going to ask me about volumes of sleep and stages. So before I launch into that, let me give you a chance to ask me some of the specifics that you think reader or listeners will be most interested in.
Yeah, I think it's always on the top of everyone's mind is how much sleep should we be getting? Is there sort of a range or a number that we should be mindful of?
Well, in mental health, behavioral health, and even in medicine, a lot of numbers are thrown around and sometimes they're a little squishy, right? It's sort of a range and so forth. But I think with sleep, solidly 8 hours, at a minimum 7 hours, but go for 8 hours is optimal for brain health and overall somatic health.
That makes sense. It's a good number to shoot for. So you mentioned sleep cycles. Could you do a brief overview and describe a little bit about the sleep cycles and maybe a little bit about the purpose of each stage?
Sure. Let me make it pretty straightforward. So there are 4 main stages of sleep: stage 1, 2, 3, and then REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. Sometimes stages 1, 2, and 3 are referred to as N1, N2, and N3, which basically means just non-REM, right? So stage 1 lasts anywhere from 1 to maybe 10 minutes. It's very light sleep. You always can tell when someone's in light sleep. You can be easily awakened. I look at it as sort of the launching pad or the runway for getting into sleep. It's sort of sequential. The brainwave activity, it's still pretty close to what you would have in normal wakefulness. So you're just kind of getting through there, 1 to 7 minutes. Stage 2, or N2, it's a little bit longer. Maybe it's anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. It kind of depends on kind of the cutoff marks for the most part. But in this stage, definitely you're in a deeper stage. It's a little bit more difficult to arouse somebody. You're beginning to do some of the housekeeping functions that are more characteristic of stage 3. By that I mean is There's a lot of reparative work that takes place when we go to sleep, a lot of wear and tear on the brain, on the tissues of the body, kind of everywhere. Sleep is really the great time for the brain to help the body recover and help recover itself. So that takes us then to stage 3. It's sometimes characterized by the type of brainwave activity that one experiences during stage 3, delta waves. It's often referred to as slow wave sleep. And if you really look at the waves, if you're doing an EEG or you're trying to record electrical activity, you would see that these are these slow, kind of undulating waves. But this is essential for brain recovery. This is where the brain clears the toxic proteins that are characterized in Alzheimer's disease, particularly beta amyloid. I think about it as that primary time when those kinds of things take place. It lasts anywhere from 10 to 60 minutes, but I think that sort of 50, maybe 45 to 60 minutes makes the most sense. So you start with sort of 1 to 10 minutes, and then you kind of go to anywhere from 10 to maybe even 20 or 30 minutes in stage 2. It changes during the night, and then you get to slow wave or delta sleep, stage 3, where it's up to an hour. And then that takes you to the rapid eye movement stage, or REM stage, and that's where most, but not all, dreaming takes place. And actually, there's another function of REM which I really want to emphasize here. And it has something to do with learning or memorization. So think about it in this way. During the day, maybe you're reading something, Len. Maybe you're reading something about Alzheimer's disease, or you're reading something about a city you're going to visit. It doesn't really matter, but you're learning something new. So you're engaging your brain in lots of ways that we can talk about, though we probably don't have time today to do that. And then later in the evening, it's time for you to go to bed, and you go to sleep, and you go through stage 1 and 2 and 3, and then you get to REM, rapid eye movement and all that. But something else happens, and that is there's a reconsolidation of those neurons that are responsible for you having learned something. So it's kind of like the finishing school. So if you really want to learn something, you get yourself into stage 3 delta or slow wave sleep, because that's where we consolidate learning. And in a real way, people who have healthy brains, they optimize sleep in such a way that REM and stage 3 sleep, that delta sleep and REM sleep, that those things happen. The volume of those stages is sufficient to maintain brain health. And if you go for many days, even weeks, maybe that's better to think about it in that way, with poor sleep, and those stages are degraded, or there's not enough volume, not enough actual minutes invested in them, you will see differences in cognitive performance, mood performance, and actually other kinds of physical and somatic problems might emerge.
So that brings up an interesting point. So do folks who experience sleep deprivation increase their chances or the likelihood that they may develop dementia or some other cognitive impairment? You know, is that a direct link? Or is it just that people with cognitive impairment tend to have more sleep issues? I know sometimes folks with dementia can get their days and nights mixed up. They might be up a good bit overnight, and then they don't get rest during the day. What's that relationship between the two?
I'm glad you phrased it in the way that you did. We get this question very often. I think it's a false dichotomy. I don't think one necessarily, it goes in one direction. I think it goes in both directions. But if you really look at the literature, the research literature on sleep and dementia, you walk away with a couple of conclusions. And I think the one at the top is chronic sleep deprivation is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's a risk factor. It does not mean that everyone who gets 4 or 5 hours a night of sleep, they're going to develop Alzheimer's disease. It just means that their risk is higher. By the way, there are people who say that they don't need sleep. that they do fine on 4 and 5. And what I would say to them is that they may do okay, but they would do better if they had 7 or 8. So it's likely the case that chronic sort of poor volume sleep, getting 4 or 5 hours a night on average, and cutting into REM sleep and stage 3 sleep is contributory, raises the risk of Alzheimer's disease, but may not necessarily cause it.
Yeah, I know a lot of caregivers who are family caregivers or folks that are still at home with a person with dementia frequently report sleep can be a challenge, right? Getting somebody to stick to a routine, having them stay asleep, get enough rest, being well rested the next morning. These are all challenges that some of our family caregivers face when taking care of a loved one with dementia. So that's good information, good things to consider when we're looking at maximizing that for our loved ones. I hear a lot of buzz out in the internet and social media and things like that about the role of technology. Right now, everyone has a cell phone or an iPad, or they're watching their laptop into the evening hours. Is there any relationship or recommendations around sleep routines where we try to limit technology, that blue light, right, that's coming from all of our devices, and how does that connect to sleep disruption?
Right. So let's talk about that for the general population, and then let's talk about it for the specific cases of dementia. And when we talk about the latter, we can also talk about why people with dementia, once they have that diagnosis, that condition, tend to have flips in sleep. There's that diurnal shift where they're up during the day, up at night and asleep during the day, and kind of what that does for stage 3 and REM sleep, that sort of thing. So, but generally speaking, you're talking about melatonin, which is a naturally occurring substance in our brains and our bodies that helps regulate sleep, right? Regulate sleep. And that's tied to our circadian rhythms. And that's really sort of the center of that is in the structure in the limbic system in the brain called the hypothalamus, right? So that's responsible for day-night, kind of awareness. It's your internal clock. And truth be told, we probably have mini clocks all over our body, all over in our cells, but there's a master clock that kind of rules them all, and that's in the hypothalamus. So what happens is that if we're exposed to blue light, when it's time, when our circadian rhythms say it's time to go to sleep, that impacts on melatonin in a negative way. And so it's harder to go to sleep. So the rule of thumb is 2 to 3 hours before you want to actually be asleep, you shouldn't be in front of blue light generators. We think about them as cell phones, laptops, iPads, things like that. That's a little silly from a practical standpoint. So a lot of us read in bed. Maybe we read from an iPad, look at a computer, a laptop, or something of that sort, look at televisions and so forth. So maybe 90 minutes. So the more time you have between sleep and your exposure to blue light, the better. So if you're already a poor sleeper, first thing you can do is back off. So it's analogous to something else, which is there's a lot of research that would demonstrate that you should have 10 to 12 hours of fasting when you sleep, and that you should probably wait 2 hours before you go to sleep after your last meal if you want to optimize sleep, you want to optimize sort of brain function and things of that sort. At the same time, let's say after you have your last meal, turn off your computer or your phone. I don't think that people are going to do it. I don't think that I always do it, but in terms of your question, it's a good idea. Now, there's the second question, which is really around dementia, and that is that the circadian rhythms are already awry, so it takes even less to disrupt them. So your ability, Lynn, to kind of get over the melatonin impact of blue light is, well, it's easier for you than it's going to be for somebody who has dementia by and large, because they're already having regulatory problems with it. So for them, particularly if they're in a senior living situation or they require a caregiver, it's important that you reduce blue light before then. And not only blue light, all light. So if we have time, we should talk a little bit about light tuning, because I think that there's a whole way of managing sleep non-pharmacologically, not in terms of medications, that anyone could do with just a little foresight.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions. I think when we all think of sleep routines, we think of younger, right? We're doing that with children, trying to get them set for the night, the wind down, being ready for bed. But I think it's a whole different mindset to be thinking about that for ourselves and for, our loved ones who might benefit from having a set sleep routine and having maybe some structure and some patterns that we follow related to when we eat and how we kind of wind down for the night, when to put our devices down, all those things that set us up for success. I know lots of family members probably want to know, should they be thinking, you mentioned melatonin. I know some folks, might see that on the shelf in the grocery store as a supplement.
Yeah.
Non-pharmacologic interventions. And I know everybody likes to try, everything else before they go to a medication. What are some other, avenues to explore that can support or enable more sleep if you're doing all the right things in your routine and you might still need extra help?
Yeah, no, great question. So let's talk about non-medication or non-pharmacologic things that you can do, anyone can do, before we talk about medications. So the first thing to understand is that sleep is not just about that period between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. when you wake up, or whatever your time period is. Actually, sleep is determined by the entire 24-hour period. So what you do earlier in the day has an impact on your ability to sleep. In obvious and non-obvious ways. The obvious way would be caffeine. Caffeine tends to hit its zenith roughly 4 hours after you drink it. So if you think about it that way, it probably makes sense to cut off your coffee by noon, or let's say 1 p.m. Same thing with chocolate. Chocolate takes a while to actually hit its high point in terms of that. So not only are these substances that you would want to subtract at certain times of the day likely to disrupt sleep, it's cumulative. So it's all the things that you do to get yourself ready. So something else that everyone recognizes, and that is physical activity. So what you do physically in a 24-hour cycle can impact on your sleep. You don't have to work out or not work out, depending on who you talk with, 2 to 3 hours before you want to go to bed. That's sort of a silly way of thinking, to my view. If you want to exercise in the morning or sometime, let's say before 5 o'clock or before 6 o'clock in the evening, just doing the exercise is really the most important thing. So I don't think that doing it at 8 in the morning for an hour, let's say from 8 to 9, going to be any better for your sleep than doing it from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. Just the fact that you're doing it becomes really important, because your body needs to recover. It needs to, kind of repair all the wear and tear from exercising, and it does that best when it's asleep. It already knows how to do that. So exercise is really important. Subtracting caffeinated beverages and foods is really important. Quieting your GI system before you go to bed so that you don't have stress hormones associated with the microbiota in your gut. You can do that by not having your largest meal before you go to bed. Don't eat right before you go to bed. That makes it even harder to basically sleep. Try to have social and meaningful engagement, during the day at some point. That's a contributor to better sleep. 15 for me, those stress reduction strategies from that app is a good way. Meditation's really important. One of the things that we've learned actually during COVID, Lynn, in working with caregivers is that when they do 15 for me or some other version of these really good center breathing or meditation exercises, is that their sleep is really improved, because sleep has been incredibly disrupted during COVID-19. All-time worse, at least with respect to as long as we've been recording sleep data, which is probably since at least World War II, if not earlier than that. So there are a number of things: moving your body, moving your mind, keep your mind active, challenged, things like that. Remember, if you learn something new during the day, your body wants to get, your mind wants to get to stage 3 so it can do that consolidation. Isn't that interesting? If you learn something during the day, your brain's motivated to get to sleep so that you can learn it better. So it's just one of those things that you don't really think about walking around in some ways. So there are many other things that we can talk about, but those are all non-pharmacologic. One thing to keep in mind about alcohol, other substances, they can help you fall asleep, but they can be disruptive to the sleep cycle. So alcohol use, you should be, careful about that. A glass is probably not going to make a difference. Many glasses probably will ultimately disrupt your sleep, even though you may fall asleep more quickly. One thing I'll say about sleep medications is that in some ways they're like opioids. Opioids are intended for short-term use, not for long-term use. Many sleeping agents, particularly the benzodiazepines and things like that, they're great on the short run, but you build tolerance to them and they disrupt the sleep cycle. So you don't want to disrupt the sleep cycle. So in no way am I suggesting to a listener, well, throw away your sleep medication, but having a conversation with your healthcare prescriber or your healthcare provider about other ways of getting to sleep are going to be important for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that you're sharing that I think some of these things seem like common sense approaches, but we're not always mindful of, when did I have my last cup of coffee? Do I have a habit of refilling, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Maybe that's playing a role. Or did I opt in for dessert in my meal? And maybe, that chocolate or that sugar is playing a role. So I think just being mindful of some of these small things that add up to big things, right? If you can make these small changes in your routine, not saying remove dessert from your life, but maybe eat a little earlier, or just be thoughtful about how it's impacting. These all come together along with the routines that you talked about and the ways to sort of wind down your day to maximize your chances of getting that good night's sleep. So I think these are great for families who are, just for their own sleep, but also if you're caring for a loved one who might be challenged with sleep or might have, as you described, those days and nights mixed up, the impact of light. Do you have room darkening drapes in your room? Maybe that can, provide more help to your body to not see that daylight at so early in the morning. So these are all really good, I think, common sense approaches to making some small changes. Start somewhere, right? Think about, am I hearing myself in any of these items, and what could I change to help support my sleep? And then if you really can't improve it by making, habit or lifestyle changes, definitely connecting with a primary care doctor to talk about other options if you need those.
I think in general, separate from, let's say, caregiving role for someone who has dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, in general, it's helpful to make a list of the things to subtract, the things to not do, and then make a list of the things to do. And on the not to do is look at caffeine in its various forms, look at sugar, make sure that you have a cutoff time, look at total volume of food before you go to bed. As I said before, I think at least 2 hours of you stopped eating at 7 and you're going to bed at 9, or you stop eating at 8 and you're going to bed at 10 or whatever. At least 2 hours is helpful for facilitating your sleep. And there are many things to add, as we talked about. we're talking about darkening, let's say, a room that you're going to sleep in. Only use your bed really for sleep. It's not really, it's not your office, so that you're trying to create good sleep habits. For somebody who has dementia, it's a little bit different because the person doesn't have agency. They can't say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. You need a caregiver to really manage it. And one of the problems that happens in nursing homes and sometimes in senior living is that light is not well regulated, nor is sound well regulated. So what you really want is you want lighting to be low, let's say on the floor lighting, so people, if they have to get up to go to the bathroom, aren't going to fall. But you want the ambient light, sort of above the waistline, to be as low as possible, because you're trying to get these circadian rhythms, which are impaired in dementia, to realign in some ways. You have to artificially or environmentally make these changes. You have to create dark, you have to create night, and create day. So the same thing would happen during the day, which is make sure that somebody is exposed to a lot of light, a lot of natural light, and if you don't have natural light, a lot of artificial light, which has high tuning. I used that word tuning before. There are lights that are better for people who have dementia. Get all that activation done during the day, so people are going to be able to sleep better at night.
Yeah, I mean, just again, habits, turning on lamps, if you need it, if it's a rainy day, get some light, open the drapes, maybe sit on the back porch if you have that opportunity, just to get outside a little bit. Well, I think these are all really great suggestions. I'm hoping that our families out there listening can take some of this information and put it into action pretty quickly to make some small changes, like I said, that add up to maybe better sleep for themselves, better sleep for their loved ones. It's a really interesting topic. So the myth that as you get older, you need less sleep, I think we've debunked that today. That
the myth, yeah.
That's not really the case. So I think this is great information.
Well, two myths, Lynn. One myth is that as we get older, we need less sleep. That's not true. I would argue you need more, but certainly you need 7 or 8 hours. The other myth is that some people just don't need much sleep. You hear people say that all the time. And if there are 100 people listening to this, there's going to be more than one of them that thinks, oh, I don't really need that much sleep. Now, just to reassure people, yeah, you can have, occasional insomnia nights when you don't sleep well, and your body is really good at recovering. In fact, if you look at electrical activity the next night when you sleep, it's like, wow, proportionately you spend even more time in REM and even more time in stage 3. So you're really trying to catch up, a little bit more. So that's important. Stress, chronic stress is really a problem. And we see a relationship between chronic stress and poor sleep. And in fact, if you went on the enrichvisits.com website, it's free, do the Mood 5 or the M5, and if you find that your scores are 6 and above, and chronically, that would indicate that your stress level is really high. It's going to impact your sleep almost always. And so figuring out what you're stressed about and doing something about that downstream or down chain is going to have more to do with improving your sleep than some of the other things that we're even talking about, we've talked about so far.
Yeah, before we close today, I know you mentioned the 15 for Me app and it offering a little bit of meditation, some exercise, and some cognitive activities. That sounds like a great combination of things to pull together if you're experiencing that stress or need a way to redirect some of that energy in a positive way. In closing, can you give us a little more information about that?
Yeah, so during COVID-19, we were at our research center, we were very focused on measuring levels of stress. And, it's no secret, it was really very high. And we were asked to come up with a remedy, if you will. How do we lower stress? And so we knew from our work and from the literature that incorporating the 3 C's, cardio, cognitive, and center breathing are ways of lowering stress. You just have to do it in a way that's practical. So we did a lot of work on trying to figure out, how much time do you need and so forth, and to create an app. It's called 15 for Me. And I really like it. I like all three aspects because you don't have to spend an hour in the gym. You can spend 10 to 12 minutes doing a cardio or a very specific cognitive exercise, and it lowers stress. So one way that this is useful for sleep is that it's reducing your stress levels, and that we see in science, over and over again. So you can find out about it at enrichvisits.com and see if that's something for you. And when your listeners may be interested to know that when we talk about brain health, we talk about something called the Brain Health 7 specific activities that anybody can do to improve their brain health. Sleep is one of the 7.
Makes
So
sense.
if you think about it, when you work on that, you're very much working on your brain health.
Yeah, good sleep will set you up for tomorrow and your ability to manage all your daily tasks and all the things you need to get done and to be more successful, it sounds like, in mitigating those risk factors around cognitive changes. So, I think today's topic was really relevant and helpful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to give us so many good practical tips we can use.
Great. Nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that concludes today's Family Matters, and join us again for next month's topic. Thanks so much. See you next time.